what prompted you to get into politics in the first place? You say you were elected 10, how many times? You ran
10 times. 10 times.
What prompted you to enter your first race? What was the impetus?
I was always interested in public events. I took an interest in politics when I was at the University of North Carolina at Tulane. I was the president of my law school class at Tulane. And in fact, I invited Richard Nixon to come down to Tulane and speak just before he got elected president. When he had gotten beaten as governor of California, he was kind of a has-been, but I could see the stirrings that he might run again. And I just wrote a letter to him and said, I'm president down here of the law school. We'd like to host you for an event. And he just happened to be coming down for a fundraiser to the old Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans, and his staff wrote back and says he'd be glad to come. So I introduced Richard Nixon, and he invited me and my wife-to-be to dinner with he and his wife, another big crowd at the fundraiser. And so that was pretty heady for a young law student. And then in any event, I was initially out of Tulane. I practiced law in New Orleans for a year. Kind of was fascinated by the local political scene in New Orleans. But my wife's family was from Faraday, and there was a great opportunity for me to practice law in Faraday. So I went from the life of New Orleans, where nothing ever closes, to pay my way through law school. I played my banjo at a place called Your Father's Mustache on Bourbon Street. So I was used to the nightlife, and I'd move over to Faraday, where they roll the streets up at 5 o'clock. Now, a wonderful town if you like to hunt and fish and be in the outdoors. Not a better place in the world to live, in my opinion. Having said that, it was very slow, and so a continuing interest in politics kind of whetted my appetite to where this is some way I could extend myself, love my city, love my part of the state, but still kind of get involved in some bigger issues. And I went to a debate and saw John McKithen was the governor of Louisiana give a stump speech. And at the time, McKithen was running for re-election against Congressman John Rarick, who was the congressman for the Baton Rouge area. Rarick accused McKithen of being tied to the mafia. There had been some Life magazine reports that someone in the governor's office had some calls with the notorious gangster Carlos Marcello. So the issue was John McKithen and the mafia. I went to Columbia, Louisiana, and saw John McKithen get up on the stage and throw off his coat and say, "Let me tell you what, I dare Rarick to come up here and fight me right now. I'm not in the mafia." Rarick's in the crowd, so right next to me. And so McKithen starts calling out the people he'd known all his life. "Reverend Johnson, you married my wife Marjorie and I. You've known me all my life. Am I in the mafia?" "Oh, no, Governor, no, Governor." Went around the audience like this. The sheriff, a typical Southern sheriff named Slim Hodges, big old rustic looking guy, he leans over to Rarick and says, "Congressman, you probably need to get out of town. This is getting kind of riley. I'm not sure I can really..." And I said, "Oh, I love this. This is what I want to do. I want to get into Louisiana politics."
That's right. Yeah, let's jump right into that. Huh?
But I ran for state senator in 1971. Was elected to the Senate. I think at the time the youngest senator there, back in I think I was 28 at the time, I believe, and served in the Senate for 8 years during Edwin Edwards' first term when he was first elected. And there were some real giants in the legislature then. And to preview talking about that time, I ran into a bunch of correspondents that wrote for the newspapers, the Times-Picayune, the Morning Advocate, a cross-section of newspaper reporters. They were having breakfast, and we got talking. I sat down with them, we got talking. I said, "When, in your opinion, was the most productive, dynamic time that you've seen the legislature, the governor, over the last 50 years?" Every single one said the 1970s when Edwin Edwards was first elected governor. We went a new constitution, open meetings law that I had the pleasure of authoring as long as the Public Records Act. All kinds of progressive legislation took place then that, quite frankly, you don't see going today. So as a consequence, it was interesting that their conclusion was this is the most productive time in Louisiana's history. And some of the giants that served back there, Claude Duval, there's a big part of the Capitol named after him. He was a senator from Houma. Intelligent, nitpicked the legislation, very solid senator. Adrien de Planche went on to be a federal judge from New Orleans. Giant senator, Sonny Mouton from over in Lafayette, President Pro Tem of the Senate. Paul Hardy, who was elected Secretary of State before me. And so all of these huge giants went on to other things. That was all during the 70s. Very interesting time. And I was honored to be a senator during that 8 years.
You use the word progressive. Is that What do you mean by that? I mean, your definition, I think that's being bandied around a lot, but I don't think that you're not aligned with the progressive movement or anything like.
Well, I think when I say progressive, we were somewhat in a rut in terms of moving the state forward. I mentioned the open meetings law, for example. When I was there in the legislature, things were done behind closed doors. There was no open process for allocating the millions of dollars in the budget. School boards and town councils would go behind closed doors, hire, fire, make the decisions, see who got the contracts. There was no requirement for public bidding. Insurance policies for the state were given to the politically connected insurance agent. I mean, cleaning all that up, running it in a more open view, building in more accountability that we have today. All that was founded in the 1970s.
In your career as an elected official, can you hit some highlights, things that you're most proud of that you accomplished when you were,
Well, I think some of the legislation that I pushed as a state senator, I mentioned Open Meetings, Public Records Act, getting the architects. Right now, if you want to be the architect for a state job, you have to make an application, and there's a selection process handled by other architects. Back then, it was who the governor's crony was. So I changed all those things in the legislature. I'm very proud of that. I was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, helped write our present Constitution in which we live. Then I think when I was Secretary of State, I'm very proud of the fact that papers like the Shreveport Times and others said that I was the best Secretary of State in the state's history at that time. And we cleaned up the election process. You know, remember Earl Long's famous line, "Oh Lord, when I die, please bury me in Louisiana so I can stay active in politics." Well, there were allegations of vote buying, and I can tell you stories for a long, long time about that kind of thing. We put in an Elections Integrity Commission. We changed, rewrote the election code from top to bottom. I built in a number of checks and balances as Secretary of State that have been acknowledged and I'm very proud of. And then I think when I became Insurance Commissioner, this state was in a terrible crisis, somewhat like it is today, unfortunately. But rates were very high, companies were not paying their claims. I shut down 50 insurance companies in the first year I was insurance commissioner. So I tried to build a foundation that I'm very proud of in terms of bringing Louisiana into the 21st century. So I think a series of events like that from the Constitutional Convention right on all make up a legacy that I look back on with pride.